Thank you, Mr. Lindley. We'll start the questioning. I want to thank you personally, 27 years in law enforcement, and I want to thank all the men and women in law enforcement. We know that they are under close scrutiny and living lives which subject them to dangerous situations on a daily basis to protect us, our neighborhoods, and our homes. But let me ask you this point blank. We're in mourning in Chicago because 2 weeks ago today, an officer responded to a domestic violence incident, came across a man with a gun, chased that man, who turned on him and killed him in a playground of a school in Chicago while the children around were cringing in fear. How often do domestic violence incidents, have you run into domestic violence incidents in your practice of law enforcement?
Thank you for the question. Law enforcement is one of the most difficult jobs I think we have in this nation. We ask a lot of our officers day in and day out. And one of the most unpredictable situations that they're called to deal with is domestic violence. They're going into a charged, emotionally charged situation, not knowing what the basis of it is into a situation that may have taken years to come about. Also, you look at the different type of weapons inside the house. You have firearms, you have bats, you have knives, you have frying pans. It is a very difficult situation, and lots of injuries to law enforcement and injuries to the public come about from domestic violence situations.
So one of the witnesses here says, well, it's okay, Rahimi, if you accepted that person would have a gun, they'll probably break some other law that they can be prosecuted. Does the presence of a firearm in a domestic violence dispute make it more dangerous for the police?
Absolutely. Firearms in the house when law enforcement is there in an emotionally charged situation, unless the situation is completely controlled, which is difficult for law enforcement to do these days, makes it very dangerous for them.
Professor Rubin, let's follow what the court has decided and see if you can help me understand it a little better. They've decided that they can't find, and Rahimi, they decided they couldn't find an analogy to removing a firearm from a person who was under a domestic violence protective order. And so as a consequence, they struck down the applicable law in that situation. And yet when it comes to the firearms themselves, they don't go back to 1791 and ask the obvious question. What did the founding fathers have in mind when they used the word arms? They seem to have expanded to almost anything. I used the example before in Highland Park at a 4th of July parade with a man on the roof of a building firing off 83 rounds in 60 seconds, killing 7 people, injuring dozens of others. There wasn't even a weapon imaginable in 1791 that could do that. How do they make that leap when it comes to arms to include that type of assault weapon?
Thank you, Senator. So this is one of the challenges and the questions that comes up after Bruin is how can we make sense of our historical gun laws in light of the vast changes, including gun technology and also in terms of our moral sensibilities. We had a blinkered moral sensibilities when it came to gendered violence back in 1791. And one of the points that I flesh out a bit in my written testimony is that if we're going to be approaching what counts as an arm at a high level of generality and allow that to evolve with the times, then we certainly need to find ways to likewise allow our regulatory frameworks to evolve as well to deal with modern problems today.
Ms. Glenn, you have a personal experience with this, which is chilling to think what you went through as a victim of domestic violence. What do you think about the argument that someone with a gun in a domestic violence episode is likely to break some other law that they can be prosecuted for, and that's good enough?
Thank you so much for the question. It certainly is not good enough. Without understanding the dynamics of domestic violence and when there is a domestic violence situation in which an abuser has a firearm and the escalation that occurs, and if you don't understand the dynamics of domestic violence, sometimes that's all that's present is the domestic violence situation. Waiting for prosecution or charging in that particular instance is unreasonable. Protective orders are built to help the victim provide themselves with protection. removing the firearm is also that part of ensuring that safety and that they can be safe.
Thank you. Senator Graham?